Hello, my lovely friends. It's Emma from A Vintage Girl on a Modern World. You know, there are some voices that don't simply play through the speakers. They become part of our lives. The sort of voices that instantly take you back to another time. A favourite memory, a happy afternoon, or a world you wish you could visit. And for me, Connie Francis has always been one of those voices. Whenever one of her songs begins to play, I immediately feel myself slowing down. The world somehow becomes a little quieter, a little gentler, and for a few minutes I'm completely transported back to the late 1950s and early 1960s. And whenever people think of Connie Francis, they often think of her incredible singing voice. And quite rightly so. She gave us some of the most memorable songs of the 20th century. Songs that people are still discovering and falling in love with today. But honestly, the older I've become, the more I've realised that what I love most isn't simply the music. It's the feeling her music creates. A feeling of warmth, of nostalgia, of comfort, and of a world that somehow still feels wonderfully inviting all these years later. Now, of course, this isn't going to be a biography of Connie Francis. There are plenty of places you can go if you're looking for every date, every record, and every chapter of her remarkable life. Today, I simply want to spend a little time talking about why Connie Francis still means so much to me. Why her music continues to touch people's hearts. Why I never grow tired watching films like Where the Boys Are and Looking for Love. And why every time I hear Connie Francis sing, I feel as though I've stepped into a gentler world for a little while. The more I thought about this episode, the more I realised that what makes Connie Francis so special isn't simply the wonderful songs she recorded. It's the honesty in her voice. Now, of course, Connie had an incredible voice, one of the finest of her generation. But there has been many wonderful singers over the years. But what made Connie different was the way she made you believe every single word she was singing. And whenever I listen to Connie, I never feel as though she's simply performing a song. I feel as though she's telling a story. And whether she's singing something joyful, romantic, or heartbreakingly sad, there is a sincerity there that seems impossible to fake. And I have to be honest, I think that's one of the reasons her music has stood the test of time. And the older I've become, the more I found myself appreciating singers who make me feel something. Not simply singers with powerful voices, but singers with heart. Singers who can make you stop whatever you're doing and really listen. And Connie has always been one of those singers for me. There's a warmth in her voice that immediately makes me feel at home. It's comforting, familiar, like hearing from an old friend you haven't spoken to in years. And perhaps that's why so many people still love her music today. Because genuine emotion never really goes out of fashion. Technology changes, musical styles change, the charts change. But a voice that comes straight from the heart will always find its way to the people. Of course, we can't talk about Connie Francis without talking about her music. Because, oh my goodness, where do you even begin? She has recorded so many wonderful songs that have become part of people's lives. Songs that have been played at family celebrations, on long car journeys, through heartbreak, and during some of life's happiest moments. And whenever I hear songs like Who's Sorry Now, Lipstick on Your Collar, or My Happiness, I'm immediately reminded why Connie became such a beloved singer. Because there's something so wonderfully timeless about them. They don't feel tied to one particular generation. They simply tell stories about life, about love, about hope, about heartache, feelings that every generation understands. And I think that's one of the reasons her music still connects with people today. Because good songs don't have an expiry date. They don't suddenly stop meaning something because the years are past. If anything, they seem to grow even more special. And every time I listen to Connie, I find myself imagining another era. A record player spinning in the corner of the room. Families gathered together after dinner. Teenagers dancing at a local hall on a Saturday night. The radio playing softly in the background while someone writes a letter to a friend. And perhaps that's the real magic of Connie Francis. She doesn't simply give us songs. She gave us memories. even for those of us who weren't around the first time around. And I honestly think that's exactly what Connie Francis gave us. As much as I love Connie's music, I also have a real soft spot for her films. And one of my absolute favourites has to be Where the Boys Are, because every single time I watch it, I'm reminded why I fell in love with films from this era in the first place, because there's something so wonderfully optimistic about them. The sunshine, the beaches, the fashion, the music. It captures a moment in time that feels full of excitement and possibility. And whenever I put a film on, I can't help but smile. It feels like the sort of world you'd happily step into if you were given the chance. And I also adore Looking for Love. It's such an enjoyable film, and Connie has a warmth on screen that's impossible not to like. She never comes across as though she's trying to be anybody else. She simply feels natural, comfortable, completely herself. And I think that's one of the reasons she's so easy to watch. And of course, these films aren't trying to be epic dramas. They don't need to be. Sometimes all we need is a film that leaves us feeling a little happier than when we did when we pressed play. And that's exactly what Connie's films do for me. Whenever I watch them, I find myself admiring all the little details. The beautiful dresses, the hairstyles, the cars, the cafes, the music playing in the background. It's a world that feels colourful, joyful and full of life. And I have to be honest, I never seem to grow tired of visiting it. The more I've thought about this episode, the more I've realised that part of what I love isn't simply Connie Francis herself. It's the world she represents. Now, before anyone misunderstands me, I don't think the past was perfect. No era ever is. But there are certain things about the late 1950s and early 1960s that I've always found incredibly appealing. And whenever I listen to Connie's music or watch one of her films, I find myself imagining a world where life seemed just a little bit slower, where friends met at the local diner, where music played from a jukebox in the corner, when people dressed up for an evening out, when a trip to the pictures felt like a real occasion. And I've always loved those little details. The pretty summer dresses, the full skirts, the cafes, the convertibles driving along the coast, the excitement of a holiday by the sea. And sometimes I find myself paying just as much attention to the background as I do to the story itself. The shops, the furniture, the hairstyles, the little touches that help bring that world to life. And honestly, I think that's part of the magic. Because Connie's music and films don't simply entertain us. They invite us into another time for a little while. A time filled with laughter, friendship, romance, and the simple pleasure of making memories with the people you love. And perhaps that's why I always come back to them. Not because I want to live in the past, but because they remind me to appreciate the little things. A favourite song, a trip to the cinema, an afternoon spent with people who make you smile. And I don't think those things will ever go out of fashion. Sometimes people assume that singers from the past only matter to the generation that grew up listening to them. But I don't believe that's true for a second. In fact, I think Connie Francis is continuing to find new audiences every single year. Young people are discovering her songs for the very first time. Older listeners are revisiting the music they grew up with. And somehow, her voice still has exactly the same effect. And I don't think that's simply because she has a beautiful singing voice. I think it's because she sang with sincerity. She made people believe every word. And no matter how much the world changes, people will always respond to honesty. And we live in a world that often feels very busy, very loud, very fast. Sometimes it feels as though we're all rushing from one thing to the next. And perhaps that's why I find myself returning to singers like Connie Francis. Her music encourages me to slow down, to sit with a cup of tea, to put a record on, and to forget about everything else for a little while. And honestly, I think we all need moments like that. And the more I've worked on this episode, the more I've realised that Connie's greatest gift wasn't simply entertaining people. She made people feel something. Joy, comfort, hope, nostalgia. And sometimes that's exactly what music is supposed to do. It reminds us of the people we've loved, the memories we've made, and the moments we'll carry with us forever. And I honestly believe that's why Connie Francis continues to touch hearts today. Because voices like hers never really fade away. They simply become part of our lives. The more I've thought about Connie Francis while putting this episode together, the more I've realised she represents so much more than wonderful songs and enjoyable films. She represents a feeling of warmth, of comfort, of nostalgia. And whenever I hear her voice, I'm always reminded why I love the vintage world so much. Not because everything was perfect, nowhere ever is, but because there was a gentleness to so much of it that still speaks to me today. And whenever she's singing Who's Sorry Now, appearing in Where the Boys Are, or making me smile and looking for love, Connie has a wonderful way of making the world just feel a little bit brighter. And I think that's a very special gift. And perhaps that's why all these years later people are still discovering her. Because genuine talent never really goes out of fashion. Neither does sincerity. And neither does heart. So thank you for spending a little time with me today. I'd love to know in the comments what your favourite Connie Francis song or film is. Perhaps it's one we've talked about today. Or maybe there's another favourite that always brings a smile to your face. As always, thank you so much for watching, for your kindness, and for being part of this little vintage community we've created. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and keep a little old-fashioned magic in your heart. I'll see you all again very soon.